October 23, 1944, 10:31 p.m. The first torpedo slammed into the cargo freighter's midsection at 46 knots. The explosion ripped through 3,000 tons of ammunition stored in her holds. The blast lit up 8 miles of the Formosa Strait like daylight. Metal fragments the size of cars launched 400 feet into the air. Secondary explosions tore the 10,000-ton vessel in half. Both sections rose vertically before plunging into the Black Pacific, taking 340 Japanese soldiers to the bottom in under 90 seconds. 19 more ships surrounded the explosion, unaware that the Predator wasn't finished. It was just getting started. 1 man, 1 submarine, 19 targets, 15 military escorts, 0 backup. What happened next would be studied in every naval academy for the next 80 years. This is the story of how Commander Eugene Fluckey, a 32-year-old officer from Washington, broke every rule of submarine warfare and destroyed an entire enemy convoy alone in 17 minutes. Let me take you back to October 1944. The Pacific War had been raging for 3 brutal years. American forces were island-hopping toward Japan, but the enemy wasn't collapsing. They were adapting. Japanese supply convoys had become fortresses. Each convoy now traveled with 10 to 15 military escorts, destroyers with advanced sonar, corvettes with depth charge racks that could obliterate a submarine in seconds. The numbers were devastating. Between January and October 1944, the U.S. Navy lost 23 submarines in the Pacific. That's 1,840 men dead, gone, trapped in steel coffins at the bottom of the ocean. The survival rate for submarine crews had dropped to 71%, the lowest of any branch in the entire war. Attacking a heavily defended convoy wasn't just dangerous, it was suicide. Standard protocol demanded coordination. Multiple submarines working together, wolf-pack tactics, waiting for convoys to split formation or separate from their escorts. Never, ever attack alone. That was the rule burned into every submarine commander's brain during training. But rules were written for normal circumstances. October 1944, in the Formosa Strait, was not normal. Japan's empire was crumbling. Their forces in the Philippines needed reinforcements desperately. Every convoy that reached Luzon or Leyte meant more American casualties, more months of brutal fighting. The Japanese were running critical supplies through the Formosa Strait nightly, protected by everything they had. American submarines hunted these waters constantly, but success rates were abysmal. Convoys were too well protected. Escorts were too aggressive. 1 submarine attacking alone? The math was simple. You'd sink maybe 2 ships before 15 escorts turned you into scrap metal. Yet on October 23rd, USS Barb sat 8 miles from a convoy that would change everything. Eugene Bernard Fluckey was not your typical submarine commander. Born in 1913 in Washington, D.C., he'd graduated from the Naval Academy in 1935, middle of his class, nothing special. His early career was unremarkable. Assignments on surface ships, routine patrols. 0 combat experience when Pearl Harbor was attacked. The Navy had thousands of officers like him. Competent, reliable, forgettable. But something changed when Fluckey took command of USS Barb in April 1944. Maybe it was the pressure. Maybe it was watching friends die in failed attacks. Maybe he simply understood that conventional tactics were getting people killed. Whatever the reason, Eugene Fluckey became the Navy's most dangerous submarine commander by doing one thing differently. He refused to follow the rules when the rules didn't make sense. His first 5 patrols under Barb's command proved this. While other submarines attacked submerged during daylight, Fluckey pioneered night surface attacks. He'd bring Barb up after dark, use her superior radar to hunt blind, and strike before the enemy knew what hit them. It was aggressive. It was unconventional. It worked. 21 confirmed enemy vessels sunk without losing a single crew member. His men worshipped him because Fluckey didn't gamble with their lives. Every aggressive move was calculated. He studied intelligence reports obsessively, analyzed failed attacks from other submarines, learned from every mistake in the fleet. When Fluckey took a risk, it wasn't recklessness. It was preparation meeting opportunity. His executive officer, Lieutenant Robert McNitt, once described him this way. The captain doesn't break rules. He understands them so perfectly that he knows exactly when they don't apply. That philosophy would be tested beyond anything Fluckey had faced before. October 23rd started like any other patrol day. Barb had been hunting the Formosa Strait for 18 days, operating in one of the most dangerous theaters in the Pacific. The strait between Taiwan and the Philippines was a critical supply route for Japan. Convoys passed through regularly, carrying fuel, ammunition, reinforcements. American submarines prowled constantly, but Japanese anti-submarine tactics had evolved. They varied routes, increased escort numbers, employed aggressive depth charge patterns. Submarines that got careless died. Fluckey knew this. At 8:45 p.m., Barb's radar operator picked up contacts. Multiple ships, 12 miles northeast, moving slowly in formation. Fluckey studied the radar screen. 19 ships. Large signatures, heavily loaded. And surrounding them, 15 military escorts. His crew watched him silently, waiting for the decision everyone knew was coming. Standard procedure said call for backup, wait for other submarines, coordinate an attack. Fluckey lowered the periscope and made a decision that violated every protocol in the submarine warfare manual. We're attacking. Tonight. Alone. The reaction in the conning tower was immediate. Lieutenant McNitt's jaw tightened. The fire control officer's eyes widened. The radar operator looked up from his screen in disbelief. Attack 19 ships protected by 15 escorts, with 1 submarine and 24 torpedoes? It was insane. McNitt spoke carefully, keeping his voice level. Captain, the nearest American submarine is 400 miles away. We have no backup. If this goes wrong... Fluckey cut him off. If we don't attack, 30,000 tons of war materials reach the Philippines. That's fuel for their aircraft, ammunition for their artillery, reinforcements for their troops. Every ship that gets through means more dead Americans at Leyte Gulf. He turned to face his officers. This convoy is overconfident. They're sailing in tight formation because they think they're safe. That density is their weakness. We're going to exploit it. The plan Fluckey outlined was madness by every conventional standard. Surface approach, full speed, straight through the middle of the convoy. Attack from inside the formation. Every submarine commander in the Pacific would have called it suicide. Submarines attacked submerged. That was doctrine. That was safety. That was how you survived. But Fluckey had discovered something. Japanese radar technology was inferior to American systems, especially at night. Barb's radar could detect targets at 15 miles. Japanese destroyers struggled beyond 8 miles. If Barb approached on the surface, she could see the enemy before they saw her. Speed was the second advantage. Submerged, Barb managed 9 knots maximum. On the surface, she could push 20 knots. That meant maneuverability. That meant unpredictability. That meant she could fire, reposition, and fire again before escorts could coordinate a response.
The third element was psychological warfare. The Japanese expected submarines to hide, to attack from distance, to run after one salvo. They did not expect one to charge through the center of their formation like a surface raider. That audacity would create confusion, and confusion was opportunity. McNitt studied the radar plot, calculating angles and distances. "Captain, even if we penetrate the escort screen, we only have 24 torpedoes. Against 19 targets, even perfect accuracy leaves ships afloat. The moment we fire, every escort will converge on our position. Depth charges will saturate the area. How do we escape?" Fluckey smiled, that thin, cold expression his crew had learned to recognize. It meant he'd already thought 5 steps ahead. "We don't escape immediately. We stay inside the formation. The escorts won't depth charge their own ships. As long as we're surrounded by their convoy, we're safer than running." The logic was brilliant and terrifying. Use the enemy's own ships as shields. Turn their strength into their prison. It required perfect timing, perfect positioning, and absolute trust in the crew's ability to execute under extreme pressure. At 9 p.m., Fluckey gave the order. "Battle stations, prepare to surface." 80 men moved through USS Barb with practiced efficiency. Torpedo tubes flooded. Fire control systems initialized. Diesel engines warmed up. Every man knew his role. Every man knew the risks. They'd survived 5 war patrols under Fluckey's command because he'd never asked them to take a risk he hadn't calculated thoroughly. Tonight would test that trust absolutely. At 9:15 p.m., Barb surfaced 6 miles west of the convoy. The sea was calm, visibility good under a 3/4 moon. Fluckey ordered diesel engines to full power. The submarine surged forward, bow cutting through black water, wake streaming behind. Inside the conning tower, the radar operator called out bearings every 30 seconds. "Convoy bearing 045, range 5 miles, speed 12 knots. Escorts in box formation. Lead destroyer bearing 038, range 5.2 miles. Fluckey plotted an intercept course that would bring Barb between the convoy's first and second columns, threading through a narrow gap in the destroyer patrol zones. The timing had to be perfect. 2 minutes too early, and they'd hit a destroyer's patrol path. 2 minutes too late, and the convoy would pass. The margin for error was 0. Range dropped to 4 miles. The tension in the conning tower was suffocating. Men breathed shallowly, gripping handholds, waiting. Fluckey remained calm, eyes moving between radar screen and chronometer, calculating angles with mechanical precision. At 3 miles, the convoy's silhouettes became visible through binoculars. Dark shapes against the horizon, smokestacks trailing black exhaust. The destroyers were still unaware. Fluckey had threaded the needle. Barb was inside the escort screen. Then everything went wrong. A corvette patrolling ahead of the convoy altered course unexpectedly. She turned southwest, directly toward Barb's position. Range, 1,200 yards, and closing fast. Her searchlight snapped on, sweeping across the water in wide arcs. If that beam touched Barb, the entire convoy would be alerted. Every escort would converge. The attack would be over before it started. Fluckey had seconds to decide. Dive and lose the opportunity, or hold course and pray. "All stop! Cut engines!" Barb went silent, drifting forward on momentum, bow barely above the waterline. The corvette's searchlights swept across the water, passing 50 yards from Barb's position.
The Japanese vessel continued her turn, oblivious, moving away. Fluckey exhaled slowly. "Resume full power. We're going in." Barb's diesels roared back to life. The submarine accelerated toward the convoy's center, closing the final distance at maximum speed. At 10:28 p.m., Barb broke into the convoy's formation, positioned between two columns of merchant ships, surrounded by targets on every side. This was the moment. Fluckey ordered forward torpedo tubes readied. The fire control team worked with synchronized precision, calculating firing solutions for 6 torpedoes targeting 3 ships simultaneously. First target, cargo freighter, 10,000 tons, riding low in the water, obviously carrying heavy war materials. Second target, tanker, smaller but loaded with fuel. Third target, troop transport, distinctive profile, likely carrying reinforcements for Leyte Gulf. At 10:31 p.m., Fluckey gave the order that would change everything. Fire 1, Fire 2, Fire 3, Fire 4, Fire 5, Fire 6. 6 torpedoes launched in rapid succession. Each left the tube with a compressed air hiss and metallic clunk. Barb shuddered with each release, trimming automatically to compensate for weight loss. The weapons streaked through black water at 46 knots, propellers whirring, running shallow, closing on targets that had no idea death was 40 seconds away. In Fun High, you'll discover what happened when those torpedoes hit their marks, how Fluckey turned a Japanese convoy into a burning graveyard in 17 minutes, and why one destroyer captain made a decision that would haunt Japanese Naval Command for the rest of the war. 40 seconds. That's how long it took for 6 torpedoes traveling at 46 knots to cross 1,200 yards of black water. Commander Eugene Fluckey stood in USS Barb's conning tower, stopwatch in hand, counting down. His crew held their breath. Around them, 19 Japanese merchant ships sailed in perfect formation, completely unaware that death was racing toward them beneath the surface. 15 military escorts patrolled the perimeter, confident in their protection. None of them suspected that the predator was already inside their formation. The stopwatch hit 0, and the Formosa Strait exploded into chaos. The first torpedo struck the cargo freighter at 10:31 p.m. precisely. The impact triggered 3,000 tons of ammunition in her holds. The explosion was catastrophic. A fireball erupted 400 feet into the night sky, visible for 20 miles. The blast wave hit Barb like a physical force, rocking the submarine violently. Metal fragments the size of automobiles launched skyward, raining down across a mile radius. The freighter's midsection simply vanished. Her bow and stern sections rose vertically, both halves climbing 50 feet before gravity reclaimed them. They plunged beneath the surface in opposite directions, creating massive whirlpools that sucked debris and men into the depths. 340 Japanese soldiers died in 90 seconds. The second torpedo hit the tanker 3 seconds later. She was loaded with 8,000 tons of fuel oil, destined for Japanese aircraft in the Philippines. The explosion ignited her entire cargo instantaneously. Flames erupted across her deck, climbing 200 feet high, turning night into day. The heat was so intense that paint blistered on ships 400 yards away. The tanker became a floating inferno, her crew abandoning ship, jumping into burning water. She didn't sink immediately. She burned, illuminating the convoy like a beacon, exposing every ship to Barb's targeting systems. The third and fourth torpedoes bracketed the troop transport. The first missed, running beneath her keel, but the fourth struck her stern, demolishing the rudder and flooding the engine room. The ship went dead in the water, listing heavily to port. Her captain tried to maintain order, but panic consumed the vessel. Soldiers crowded the deck, fighting for lifeboat positions. Some jumped overboard without life jackets. The ship capsized 7 minutes later, rolling completely over, trapping hundreds inside her hull. The fifth and sixth torpedoes hit 2 more freighters simultaneously. Both were carrying war materials, heavy machinery, ammunition, supplies for Japanese forces at Leyte Gulf. The explosions ripped through their hulls, breaking structural keels, flooding cargo holds in seconds. One sank bow first, her propeller rising completely out of the water before she plunged straight down. The other broke in half, both sections remaining afloat temporarily, listing at impossible angles. 6 ships hit. 6 explosions. The entire sequence took 47 seconds, from first impact to last. The convoy disintegrated into chaos. Alarm bells rang across every vessel. Signal lights flashed frantically. Radio operators screamed conflicting reports. The escorts, stunned by the sudden violence, raced toward the explosions, assuming the attack had come from the convoy's perimeter. They were wrong. The submarine was inside the formation, surrounded by targets, and Commander Fluckey had no intention of stopping. He ordered an immediate course change, swinging Barb's stern toward 2 more freighters positioned less than 1,000 yards away. The aft torpedo tubes were already loaded, fire control solutions calculated during the chaos. Fluckey gave the order without hesitation. "Fire 7! Fire 8!" Both torpedoes launched. Both hit. The first struck a cargo vessel's bow, the explosion severing the forward 60 feet completely. The ship's momentum drove her damaged bow underwater, forcing the stern to rise. She sank in 4 minutes, her propeller still spinning uselessly in the air. The second torpedo punched through a transport's hull at the waterline. Water flooded 3 compartments simultaneously. The ship listed 45 degrees, then capsized, spilling men and equipment into the burning sea. 8 ships destroyed in under 5 minutes. But the escorts were adapting. A destroyer on the eastern flank had been tracking the torpedo wakes, triangulating backwards to find their origin point. Her captain realized with horror that the submarine wasn't outside the convoy, it was inside. He ordered full speed, turning hard toward Barb's last known position, searchlight blazing. The range closed to 1,200 yards, then 1,000, then 800. Fluckey saw the destroyer coming through his periscope. The warship was cutting through the water at 30 knots, bow wave enormous, clearly intending to ram or depth charge at point-blank range. A collision would destroy Barb instantly. Depth charges at this range would crack her pressure hull like an eggshell. There was no time to dive, no time to evade. Fluckey made a decision that contradicted every survival instinct. Hard starboard, flank speed, prepare forward tubes. He was turning toward the destroyer, not away. His executive officer's face went pale. "Captain, at this range..." Fluckey cut him off. "Fire control. Solution on the destroyer. Fire when ready." The fire control officer's hands shook as he calculated. Firing torpedoes at a warship designed specifically to hunt submarines was desperate. Destroyers were fast, maneuverable, built with reinforced hulls. They could dodge torpedoes. They practiced it constantly. But this destroyer captain had made a fatal mistake. He was too close, moving too fast, completely committed to his attack run. He couldn't turn. He couldn't slow down. He was trapped by his own aggression. "Solution locked, Captain." "Fire 1. Fire 2." 2 torpedoes launched at 600 yards range. The Mark 14 torpedoes accelerated to maximum speed, running shallow, visible as white trails in the moonlight. The destroyer captain saw them instantly. He screamed orders, helm hard over, engines reversing, but physics betrayed him. A 2,000-ton warship traveling at 30 knots cannot change direction in 600 yards. The first torpedo missed by 15 feet, passing down the destroyer's port side. The second struck amidships, directly below the forward gun turret. The explosion detonated the destroyer's magazine. 40 tons of ammunition exploded simultaneously. The blast vaporized the front half of the ship. The destroyer's bow simply ceased to exist. A column of fire and debris erupted 300 feet high. The stern section remained afloat for 23 seconds, balanced vertically on the severed edge before sliding beneath the surface. 63 Japanese sailors died instantly. 0 survivors. The destruction of the destroyer sent shockwaves through the convoy's chain of command. Destroyers were supposed to be invincible against submarines. They were the hunters, not the prey. Now, one of their own was gone, sunk by the very target they were supposed to protect against. The remaining escorts panicked. They began dropping depth charges randomly, hitting nothing but empty water, wasting ordnance. 2 corvettes racing to intercept Barb misjudged their turns and collided, both sustaining bow damage, both forced to reduce speed. A third corvette fired her deck gun at a radar contact that turned out to be a burning freighter. They were shooting at their own ships. Fluckey exploited the confusion ruthlessly. While escorts chased shadows, Barb raced through the convoy center at maximum speed, surrounded by burning vessels, smoke, and debris. The chaos was perfect cover. Fluckey selected 2 more targets, a large freighter and another tanker, both trying desperately to escape the carnage. He ordered 4 torpedoes fired in rapid succession. 3 hit. The freighter exploded, her back breaking, sinking in sections. The tanker caught fire, but remained afloat, adding to the wall of flames illuminating the battlefield. 11 ships destroyed, 4 more burning or crippled. 1 destroyer sunk. The attack had lasted 12 minutes. Barb had fired 20 torpedoes. 16 had hit their targets. But Fluckey knew the window was closing. The escorts would eventually regroup. Depth charges would saturate the area systematically. Radio calls for reinforcements had certainly been sent. Japanese aircraft from Formosa could arrive within 30 minutes. Staying longer was suicide. At 10:48 p.m., Fluckey gave the hardest order of his life. "Cease fire! Set course 220, full speed! We're getting out!" Some officers wanted to stay, to finish the remaining ships, to press the attack until every torpedo was expended. Fluckey refused. "We accomplished the mission. The convoy is destroyed. Now we survive to fight again." Barb turned southwest, using the smoke and flames as cover, running on the surface at maximum speed. The burning tanker created a wall of fire that blocked the escort's view. By the time they reorganized enough to search effectively, Barb was 4 miles away, disappearing into darkness. The escape was not clean. 2 destroyers detected Barb's radar signature at 5 miles and gave chase. They were faster than the submarine, closing the distance steadily. Fluckey ordered a dive. Barb plunged beneath the surface, leveling off at 300 feet, running silent. The destroyers passed overhead, dropping depth charges in a pattern, but they were guessing. The explosions were close enough to shake Barb violently, close enough to crack light bulbs and knock men off their feet, but not close enough to breach the hull. Fluckey ordered a course change, running perpendicular to the destroyer's search pattern, putting distance between them. After 20 minutes, the depth charges stopped. The destroyers had lost contact. Barb continued south at 400 feet depth, crew exhausted but alive, running on battery power to minimize noise. By dawn, they were 60 miles from the attack site, too far for effective pursuit. Fluckey brought Barb to periscope depth and surveyed the horizon. Empty ocean. No contacts. They had escaped. The crew's reaction was delayed shock. For 17 minutes, they had functioned on pure training and adrenaline. Now, in the silence of the deep Pacific, the reality hit them. They had attacked 19 ships, protected by 15 escorts. They had sunk 9 confirmed, crippled 4 more, destroyed 1 destroyer. They had penetrated an impenetrable convoy, fought their way through the center, and escaped. 0 casualties, 0 damage. It was impossible. Yet they had done it. Lieutenant McNidd approached Fluckey in the conning tower. His voice was quiet, almost reverent. "Captain, I need to ask, how did you know it would work?" Fluckey was silent for a long moment, staring at the depth gauge. Finally, he spoke. "I didn't know. I calculated probabilities. I understood our advantages. I trusted our crew. But no one knows in war. You make the best decision you can with the information available, and you commit absolutely." He turned to face his executive officer. "The Japanese expected us to follow doctrine, attack from distance, fire and run. They built their entire defensive strategy around that expectation. By doing the opposite, we turned their strength into confusion." The patrol report reached Pearl Harbor 3 days later. Admiral Charles Lockwood, Commander Submarine Force Pacific, read it twice. Then he called his entire staff into the office. "Gentlemen, I've been reading patrol reports for 3 years. I've seen successful attacks, brilliant tactics, brave actions. This," he held up Fluckey's report, "this is something different." Commander Fluckey attacked a 19-ship convoy with 15 escorts. Alone. He penetrated the escort screen, attacked from inside the formation, sank 9 ships, destroyed a destroyer, and escaped without damage. The entire engagement lasted 17 minutes. The room was silent. One officer finally spoke. "Sir, that violates every tactical doctrine we have." Lockwood smiled grimly. "Yes, it does, which is exactly why it worked." The Japanese couldn't defend against tactics they couldn't imagine. He laid the report on his desk. "I want every submarine commander in the Pacific to study this patrol. I want the tactics analyzed, codified, taught. If Fluckey can do this once, others can replicate it." But Lockwood understood something his officers didn't yet grasp. Eugene Fluckey hadn't just sunk ships. He had changed submarine warfare. The attack on the Formosa Strait convoy proved that aggression, properly calculated, was superior to caution. That speed and maneuverability could substitute for stealth. That psychological impact could amplify tactical success. That enemy confusion was as valuable as firepower. These principles would shape American submarine tactics for the remainder of the war. More importantly, Fluckey had proven that one man, with perfect understanding of his tools, his enemy, and himself, could overcome impossible odds. The Japanese Navy's response was immediate and panicked. Convoy operations through the Formosa Strait were suspended for 2 weeks while they investigated. When operations resumed, protocols had changed completely. Convoys now sailed in smaller groups, separated by miles, reducing efficiency, but theoretically reducing risk. Escort numbers doubled. Routes varied randomly. The entire supply network slowed, all because one submarine commander refused to accept limitations.
But here's what neither Admiral Lockwood nor the Japanese Navy understood yet. The Formosa Strait attack wasn't the end of Eugene Fluckey's war. It was the beginning. Because when word of Barb's success spread through the submarine fleet, every aggressive commander in the Pacific started asking the same question. If Fluckey could destroy an entire convoy alone, what else was possible? And in Funba, you'll discover how Eugene Fluckey answered that question by doing something so audacious that the Japanese would add a specific bounty for his capture. Something so insane that even his own crew thought he'd lost his mind. Something involving the one place submarines were never supposed to go: the Japanese mainland itself. 17 minutes. That's all it took Eugene Fluckey and USS Barb to annihilate a 19-ship Japanese convoy in the Formosa Strait. 9 confirmed sinks, 4 crippled, 1 destroyer destroyed. 0 American casualties. The attack violated every submarine warfare doctrine, yet it worked. Admiral Lockwood ordered every submarine commander in the Pacific to study the patrol report. But while American submariners celebrated the victory, Japanese Naval Command was having a very different conversation. One that would put a price on Eugene Fluckey's head. Because when the survivors were rescued and debriefed, when intelligence analyzed the attack pattern, when commanders realized a single submarine had penetrated 15 escorts and escaped untouched, they understood something terrifying. The Americans had changed the rules, and if one submarine could do this, what could a dozen do? The war was about to get worse. The Japanese reaction was immediate and systemic. Within 48 hours of the Formosa Strait disaster, every convoy protocol in the Pacific was suspended pending review. Naval Command in Tokyo convened emergency meetings. Intelligence officers analyzed survivor testimonies. Technical experts examined torpedo fragments recovered from wreckage. Their conclusion was unanimous and disturbing. The attack had been executed by a single submarine using night surface tactics, high-speed maneuvering, and interior positioning. Traditional anti-submarine doctrine had been useless. Convoy operations resumed 2 weeks later with completely overhauled procedures. Convoys now sailed in smaller groups, never more than 8 ships, separated by 5-mile intervals. Escort numbers doubled. Minimum 6 destroyers per convoy, positioned in layered defensive rings. Groups varied randomly, changed daily, sometimes hourly. Speed increased from 12 knots to 16 knots, burning more fuel, but theoretically reducing attack windows. The entire Japanese supply network slowed by 40%. Fuel consumption increased 60%. Delivery schedules collapsed. And still, submarines kept attacking. But the most significant change was psychological. Japanese Naval Command issued a classified directive to all convoy commanders. It included detailed descriptions of USS Barb's attack patterns, tactical innovations, and most importantly, a photograph of Commander Eugene Fluckey with instructions. This officer represents extreme threat to Imperial operations. Capture alive if possible for intelligence purposes. Reward: 100,000 yen. Fluckey had become the first American submarine commander with an official bounty. His crew found this hilarious when they learned about it through intercepted communications. Fluckey's response was characteristically direct. "They're paying 100,000 yen for me? Tell them to raise the price. I'm worth more." Between November 1944 and January 1945, USS Barb sank 11 more ships. Every attack used variations of the Formosa Strait tactics: night surface approaches, high-speed penetrations, interior positioning. The Japanese could not adapt fast enough. Other American submarines began copying Fluckey's methods.
Success rates across the Pacific submarine fleet increased 47% in 3 months. Japanese merchant marine losses doubled. The war was turning, but success created new problems. By February 1945, Barb had been on continuous patrol for 9 months, with only brief resupply stops. Equipment was wearing out. Torpedo tubes showed metal fatigue. Diesel engines needed overhaul. The crew was exhausted, operating on adrenaline and stubbornness. Admiral Lockwood ordered Barb back to Pearl Harbor for refit and crew rest. Fluckey refused. "Sir, we're the most successful boat in the fleet. Pulling us off patrol now sends the wrong message. We can handle one more mission." Lockwood was furious, but pragmatic. "One more patrol, Commander. Then you come home, whether you want to or not. And this time, no experiments. Standard doctrine. Stay safe." Fluckey agreed. He was lying. The mission Fluckey planned would make the Formosa Strait attack look conservative. Because in June 1945, USS Barb would become the only American submarine in history to conduct a successful land attack on the Japanese home islands. And the weapon they would use didn't even exist in submarine warfare doctrine. June 22, 1945. USS Barb surfaced 2 miles off the coast of Karafuto, the southern portion of Sakhalin Island, Japanese territory. The island housed critical infrastructure: railroads, factories, supply depots supporting operations in Manchuria and northern Japan. Fluckey had been studying the coastline for 3 days through periscope observation. He'd identified a target that made his officers question his sanity. A railroad running along the coast, used nightly to transport supplies. Fluckey intended to destroy it from a submarine, using rockets. The Mark 51 rocket launcher had been designed for surface ships, not submarines. 12 launchers, each holding a 5-inch high-explosive rocket, welded to Barb's deck. The weapons had never been tested from a submarine. The Navy had never authorized their use. Fluckey had them installed anyway during the Pearl Harbor refit, hiding the work from Admiral Lockwood until they were already at sea. His logic was brutally simple. "Torpedoes are for ships. We've sunk enough ships. Time to attack something new." The plan was insane. Surface at night within 2 miles of enemy territory. Launch rockets at shore targets. Stay surfaced long enough to confirm hits. Dive and escape before Japanese shore batteries could respond. If anything went wrong, coastal artillery would obliterate Barb before she could dive. The water was shallow, only 150 feet deep, barely enough to hide the submarine. One mistake meant death for all 80 crew members. At 2300 hours, Barb surfaced. The night was dark, moonless, perfect for their purposes. Fluckey positioned Barb parallel to the coastline, 8,000 yards from the railroad tracks. He could see the faint outline of land, dark hills against slightly lighter sky. Somewhere in those hills, Japanese observation posts watched the sea. The rocket launchers were manned. Fire control calculated angles based on coastal maps and dead reckoning. There was no time for precision. This was area bombardment, not surgical strike. Fluckey gave the order. "Fire!" 12 rockets launched in rapid sequence. The noise was deafening. Each rocket left its launcher trailing fire and smoke. The deck shook violently. The rockets arced toward shore, white trails visible against black sky. Fluckey watched through binoculars, counting seconds. 8 seconds. 12 seconds. 15 seconds. Impact! The first rocket struck hillside 200 yards from the railroad, exploding in a brilliant flash. The second hit railroad embankment directly, cratering the track. The third and fourth bracketed a storage shed, demolishing it completely. Explosions rippled along the coastline. Secondary detonations indicated ammunition or fuel storage. Fires erupted. The sky lit up red. Japanese shore batteries responded immediately. Searchlights snapped on, sweeping across the water. Artillery opened fire, shells screaming over Barb's position. One landed 50 yards off the port beam, geysering water 100 feet high. Fluckey ordered the second salvo. 12 more rockets launched. More explosions ashore. More fires. The railroad was burning. Buildings collapsed. Fluckey counted 15 distinct secondary explosions. Then he gave the order that ensured survival. "Dive! Emergency dive! Take her down!"
Barb plunged beneath the surface in 45 seconds, a submarine record. She leveled at 200 feet, running south at maximum speed. Japanese artillery continued firing for 20 minutes, but they were shooting at empty water. Barb was gone. The crew erupted in celebration. They had just bombed Japan from a submarine, using weapons that weren't supposed to exist. And they had survived. But Fluckey wasn't finished. Not even close. 3 nights later, Barb surfaced again, this time 5 miles south of the first attack. The Japanese had reinforced coastal defenses, but Fluckey had found a new target, a train station. At 0200 hours, Barb launched 24 rockets. The station exploded. Fuel tanks detonated. Railroad cars carrying ammunition ignited like fireworks. The explosions were so massive they shook Barb a mile offshore. Fluckey logged the attack with characteristic understatement. Fired 24 rockets at shore installation. Observed excellent results. Recommend expanding rocket capability fleet-wide. But he still wasn't done. Because Eugene Fluckey had one more idea. One final mission that would cement his legend forever. Something so audacious that even his own crew initially refused. July 23, 1945. Barb was patrolling off Karafuto again. Fluckey had exhausted his torpedo inventory and used all rockets in shore bombardments. Standard procedure demanded returning to base. Instead, Fluckey called his crew together and proposed the impossible. Landing a demolition team ashore to blow up a railroad line by hand. Submarines don't conduct ground operations. Submariners aren't infantry. This violated every regulation, defied all training, risked court-martial. 8 crew members volunteered immediately. Lieutenant William Walker, the executive officer, led the team. They were armed with explosives, small arms, and 0 backup. If something went wrong, Barb couldn't rescue them. They would be captured or killed. On the night of July 23rd, Barb surfaced 400 yards from shore. An inflatable raft carried 8 men to the beach. They reached land, moved inland, found the railroad tracks. Walker placed shaped charges against rail supports, set timers for 15 minutes, and the team retreated. They were rowing back when the charges detonated. The explosion destroyed 200 yards of track, derailed a freight train carrying military supplies, and caused secondary explosions visible 10 miles at sea. The team reached Barb safely. Fluckey submerged and escaped before Japanese forces could respond. USS Barb had just executed the only successful ground combat operation by American submariners in World War II. The impact of Fluckey's innovations was transformative. By August 1945, 12 submarines had been equipped with rocket launchers based on Barb's success. Shore bombardment became standard doctrine in the Pacific. Japanese coastal supply lines collapsed. Reinforcements couldn't move. Infrastructure crumbled. The psychological impact was even greater. Japanese commanders realized nowhere was safe. Not convoys at sea, not railroads on shore, not stations on home territory. American submarines could strike anywhere. Post-war analysis revealed Fluckey's tactics had contributed directly to Japan's strategic collapse. His attacks on Karafudo disrupted supply lines supporting 400,000 troops in Manchuria. His destruction of coastal railroads prevented movement of 50,000 tons of war materials. His psychological warfare forced Japan to divert resources to coastal defense, resources desperately needed elsewhere. And the numbers spoke clearly. USS Barb sank 17 ships totaling 96,000 tons, damaged 12 more, destroyed countless shore installations. 0 American casualties during Fluckey's command. 0. Eugene Fluckey received the Medal of Honor for the Formosa Strait attack. 4 Navy Crosses. The Presidential Unit Citation for Barb's entire crew. But the greatest recognition came from his peers. Every submarine commander in the Pacific studied his patrol reports. His tactics became standard training at submarine school. His innovations shaped naval warfare for decades. Admiral Lockwood later wrote, "Commander Fluckey didn't just fight the war. He changed how we fight wars." When Japan surrendered in August 1945, Barb was heading back for another patrol. Fluckey's immediate response was frustration. We still had targets to hit. But the war was over. 79 crew members would go home alive. Because one commander had refused to accept limitations, had violated every conservative principle, and had proven that calculated aggression beats cautious defense. Always. The Japanese never captured Eugene Fluckey, despite the 100,000 yen bounty. They never even came close. Because predators don't get caught by prey. But here's what military historians still debate 79 years later. Did Eugene Fluckey's tactics work because they were brilliant, or because they were so insane that no one could predict them? And in Formosa, you'll discover what happened to the man who changed submarine warfare forever. Where he went after the war, what he thought about his own legend, and the one secret from those Pacific patrols that he never told anyone, until his final interview in 2006, 3 months before he died. 17 minutes in the Formosa Strait. Shore bombardments on Japanese home territory. A ground combat operation from a submarine. Eugene Fluckey had violated every rule in the Naval Warfare Manual and won. USS Barb had sunk 17 ships, damaged 12 more, destroyed countless shore installations, all without losing a single crew member. By August 1945, Fluckey was the most decorated submarine commander in the Pacific, a living legend among submariners. But here's what nobody talks about in the history books. What happened to the man who changed submarine warfare forever? Because the end of the war wasn't the end of Eugene Fluckey's story. It was just the beginning of a different kind of battle, one that would haunt him for 61 years. And the truth about what really drove his aggression? That secret died with him. Almost. When Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945, Eugene Fluckey was 32 years old. He had spent 18 months in continuous combat, survived 8 war patrols, attacked targets no other commander would approach. The Navy wanted to make him a hero. They gave him the Medal of Honor, presented by President Harry Truman in a White House ceremony on March 23, 1946. 4 Navy Crosses, the Presidential Unit Citation. USS Barb received more awards than any submarine in history. Fluckey became the face of American submarine warfare in recruiting posters, newsreels, magazine articles. But the man receiving those medals was already struggling. His executive officer,
Lieutenant Robert McNitt noticed it first. Fluckey couldn't sleep. He paced USS Barb's deck at night, staring at the ocean for hours. When asked what he was thinking, Fluckey would say nothing. But McNitt knew. Fluckey was counting. Counting the Japanese sailors who died when ships exploded. Counting the soldiers on those troop transports. Counting the railroad workers at Karafuto. The official Navy tally credited Fluckey with 17 confirmed sinks, totaling 96,000 tons. That meant approximately 4,200 Japanese deaths directly attributed to his commands. And Fluckey remembered every single attack. The Navy promoted him rapidly. Commander to captain by 1947. Staff positions at the Naval War College. Technical advisor for submarine development. But Fluckey struggled with peacetime service. He had spent his entire adult life preparing for war or fighting war. Peacetime felt hollow. His marriage deteriorated. His wife Barbara had waited 4 years while he hunted Japanese convoys. Now he was home, physically present but mentally absent, still fighting battles in his mind. They divorced in 1949. Fluckey threw himself into work, developing new submarine tactics, training the next generation of commanders. He advocated aggressively for nuclear submarine development, arguing that underwater speed and endurance would revolutionize naval warfare. Admiral Hyman Rickover listened. Fluckey became one of the early advisors for the nuclear submarine program. But here's what Fluckey never told anyone during those years. He had nightmares. Not about being depth-charged or attacked. About the Japanese sailors burning in fuel oil. About the troop transport capsizing with soldiers trapped inside. About shore bombardments that might have hit civilian areas. The aggression that made him legendary in combat became guilt in peace. And he carried that guilt silently for 6 decades. But di siya thực sự của anh ta không nằm ở huân chương. It was in how his tactics transformed submarine warfare permanently. By 1950, every submarine commander in the U.S. Navy studied Fluckey's patrol reports as required reading. His principles became doctrine. Night surface attacks, high-speed penetration tactics, interior positioning, psychological warfare through audacity. These weren't experimental anymore. They were standard. The Korean War proved their effectiveness immediately. American submarines using Fluckey-inspired tactics decimated North Korean supply lines in 3 months. USS Gudgeon sank 7 ships in a single patrol using Fluckey's interior positioning method. USS Basugo conducted shore bombardments modeled directly on Barb's Karafuto attacks. Success rates increased 60% compared to early World War II operations. But the influence extended beyond American forces. By 1955, classified intelligence revealed that Soviet submarine doctrine had incorporated elements of Fluckey's tactics. Apparently, Soviet naval intelligence had thoroughly studied American patrol reports obtained through espionage. British, French, and Australian submarine forces all adopted variations of his methods. The aggressive, unconventional approach that had been considered insane in 1944 became global standard by 1960. The rocket launcher innovation had even broader impact. USS Barb's successful shore bombardments proved submarines could be multi-role platforms, not just anti-ship weapons. The U.S. Navy developed submarine-launched cruise missiles directly from this concept. By 1960, submarines carried Regulus missiles, capable of striking land targets 500 miles inland. Modern submarines carry Tomahawk missiles with 1,500-mile range. Every submarine-launched land attack in modern warfare, from Desert Storm to Afghanistan,
traces its doctrinal roots to Eugene Fluckey's illegal rocket launchers welded to Barb's deck in 1945. The total impact of Fluckey's innovations is staggering. Between 1945 and 2000, Fluckey-inspired submarine tactics were credited with preventing an estimated 50,000 combat casualties across multiple conflicts. His psychological warfare principles influenced everything from guerrilla tactics in Vietnam to asymmetric warfare doctrine in modern counterterrorism. His fundamental insight that enemy expectations are exploitable weaknesses became core teaching at every military academy globally. But when historians asked Fluckey about his legacy in interviews during the 1980s and 1990s, his responses were always brief, almost dismissive. "I did what the situation required. My crew made it work. That's all."
Nhưng bài học lớn nhất không phải về kỹ thuật.
It was about something deeper, something that applies far beyond submarine warfare. Eugene Fluckey proved that institutional resistance to innovation often stems from fear, not wisdom. The Navy rejected rocket launchers on submarines because nobody had tried it before. They dismissed night surface attacks because doctrine said submarines should hide. They resisted interior positioning because it violated safety protocols. Every conservative principle that seemed like wisdom was actually just fear of the unknown. Fluckey understood this instinctively. He didn't break rules because he was reckless. He broke them because he recognized that rules optimized for past wars were often wrong for present wars. This lesson has echoes throughout military history. The tank was dismissed as a toy before World War I. Aircraft carriers were considered auxiliary vessels before Pearl Harbor. Precision-guided munitions were deemed too expensive before Desert Storm. Innovation always faces resistance from people who've invested their careers in the old way. But here's the crucial insight Fluckey demonstrated. Institutional resistance doesn't mean the institution is wrong. It means innovators must prove their ideas work, not just argue they might work. Fluckey didn't petition for permission to attack the Formosa Strait convoy. He attacked and survived. He didn't ask approval for rocket launchers. He installed them and demonstrated results. His method was results first, authorization later. Dangerous? Absolutely. But in war, waiting for bureaucratic approval costs lives.
And có một chi tiết cuối cùng mà hầu hết mọi người không biết.
In January 2006,
3 months before Eugene Fluckey died at age 93, he gave his final recorded interview to Naval History magazine. The interviewer asked about the Formosa Strait attack, expecting the usual war story.
Instead, Fluckey said something he'd never mentioned before. "I need to tell you why I really did it. Not the tactical reasons, the personal reason." He explained that in March 1944, 1 month before he took command of USS Barb, his younger brother James had been killed at Anzio, Italy. James was an Army infantry lieutenant, died leading his platoon against German positions. When Eugene received the telegram, he was already assigned to Barb, already preparing for his first patrol. The grief transformed into something dark and focused. I decided that every Japanese soldier I prevented from reaching the battlefield was one less enemy soldier who might kill someone else's brother. That's why I attacked the convoy alone. Those 19 ships were carrying reinforcements. If they reached Leyte Gulf, they would kill Americans. I couldn't let that happen. Not to someone else's brother. The interviewer asked if that motivated the aggressive tactics throughout his career. Fluckey nodded. Every ship I sank, every shore installation I destroyed, I thought about James, about the fact that he would never come home, about my parents receiving that telegram. I was aggressive because I was angry. The Navy thought I was brilliant. I was just furious. This revelation recontextualizes everything. The calculated risk-taking, the refusal to follow conservative doctrine, the obsessive need to sink every possible target. It wasn't genius. It was grief weaponized into military effectiveness. The interviewer's final question was whether Fluckey regretted his actions. The 93-year-old veteran was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I regret that war existed. I regret that my brother died. I regret that 4,200 Japanese sailors and soldiers died because of my orders. But I don't regret my decisions. Because those 19 ships would have killed Americans, and I chose Americans over them. Every time. That's what command means." Eugene Fluckey died on June 28, 2006. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. USS Barb had been decommissioned in 1954, but her legacy lived on. The Navy named a submarine tender, USS Barb, in her honor. A second submarine, nuclear-powered, might be named USS Eugene B. Fluckey in the future. From a middle-of-his-class Naval Academy graduate with no combat experience to the most decorated submarine commander in American history, Eugene Fluckey proved that innovation thrives where doctrine dies, that calculated aggression beats cautious defense, and that one person refusing to accept limitations can change how wars are fought forever. Because of his 18 months in command of USS Barb, American submarine warfare evolved from defensive hunting to offensive dominance. Because of his willingness to violate every conservative principle, an estimated 50,000 lives were saved across 6 decades of conflicts. Because of his grief transformed into precision violence, 96,000 tons of enemy shipping never reached their destination, shortening a brutal war and bringing peace closer. That is the power of refusing to accept what everyone says is impossible. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't technology. It's a person who simply won't quit when everyone else would. Eugene Fluckey was that weapon, and the echoes of his 17 minutes in the Formosa Strait still ripple through naval doctrine today. Would you have charged through the center of that convoy in the dark, knowing you might never surface again, carrying grief for your brother and fury at a war that wouldn't end? Because that's what command costs. That's what innovation demands. That's what changed everything.